Welcome to a brand new episode of the All Hoops podcast. I'm your host, Steve Inman, joined as always by producer to the stars and co-host Chris Brito. We have a jam-packed show for you today, which includes breaking down the NBA Finals, Kyrie Irving's NBA future, and a pivotal NBA draft on Thursday. Before we get to all that, Chris, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Stevie. Happy to be here on another episode of the All Hoops podcast. Happy to be here with you. I understand you had COVID recently and you're doing much better. You look great. So there's a lot that needs to be said, but the first thing I need to tell you today, you deserve all your flowers. You picked the Warriors to win the NBA Finals. Congratulations. I hear you're buying everybody on the All Hoops podcast staff drinks after winning your big bet. So congrats. And congrats to the whole staff of you and me. In any case, we have a lot to talk about. But I think as soon as I saw this tweet, I said, all right, me and Steve need to do a show today. And it was about this tweet that the Nets and Kyrie Irving apparently are having some issues in getting a contract situation resolved. And so the Knicks and the Lakers and the Clippers could potentially go for his services. Now, we have criticized Kyrie Irving throughout his whole tenure with the Nets. You know, he was a player that we both really liked before he went to the Nets. Would you want Kyrie Irving on the Knicks?
I mean, Kyrie as a basketball player is a top 15 player in the world. So it's hard to say no right off the bat, but you're talking about a guy who's looking for $200 million who has shown very little interest in playing basketball the last few years. And he didn't really want to play in Boston. He had one of his best buddies in Kevin Durant with Brooklyn. He didn't really want to play in Brooklyn. What's going to make him want to be motivated to play here? And I just think it would end up being Stephon Marbury 2.0, where, you know, he's feuding with the media, he's feuding with the fans, and I don't want to try it. I think it's going to be super complicated to get it to happen. You're going to have to trade draft picks and young players to dump contracts like Fournier and Noel. And then on top of that, you have to be sure that this guy actually wants to be here, and you have to put something in his contract, which I'm not sure he would let you, that says that, you know, you're going to get your money based on games played. And I don't think he would let you do that. And I think at the end of the day, the Knicks and the Lakers, what the report said, are just basically here for leverage to say, Kyrie Irving, go get your $200 million in Brooklyn. Because if you're Brooklyn and you let him walk to the Nets, you're still over the cap. So you can't really go out and say, we're replacing you with Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine. We're basically going to replace you with whatever we can get back in a sign and trade, like a Evan Fournier or a Nerlens Noel, you know, or Russell Westbrook, God forbid. So I think if you're Brooklyn, you just got to bite the bullet and give him the money. Maybe he lets you go with, you know, a 3-year max instead of the full max, but it's just a terrible situation for the Nets because they can't afford to lose him and they can't count on him.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I think what you just said, I think Kyrie and his camp are probably just using the Knicks as leverage, as they usually do for these sorts of things.
Can you imagine that first practice where Tom Thibodeau's trying to get Kyrie Irving to, you know, fight over a screen or try on defense? Kyrie's going to get him fired.
Well, you know what? Didn't they play together with Team USA?
Did.
So
Thibodeau was an assistant coach, but like
there's that familiarity with
sure.
with Kyrie at least, but it's not a move that would make me very excited, but I acknowledge that it is an upgrade in talent, and we're not in a position to be complain about that at all.
It's just so hard for this organization always to kind of take the long view and try to build through the draft, but they're going to have to do that because to throw this all away on a guy who has played 103 games in 3 seasons and now he's 30, I just think it's the ultimate panic button move to try to make a run to a 5 seed this year. And if you look at what Kyrie Irving's done in his playoff career the last few years, first round exit is basically the only thing on his resume. He didn't play in last year's playoffs when they had that duel against the Bucks where they lost in the second round, and the rest of them were first round exits. You could look at it. He looked very disinterested this year against the Boston Celtics, where he wasn't really playing a lot of defense. He had that Tommy Beer called him out for basically when they're down 3-0 in the series. He has about a second and a half left in the shot clock with the ball in his hands before the half, and he doesn't even try to put up a shot. And to me, without Kevin Durant to hold him accountable, this would be Kyrie Irving's team on a team that really isn't going anywhere. What would make him more motivated to play basketball? And that's why I would just stay away from it.
Yeah, it just seems like it would devolve into a toxic situation, and I'm really okay with not signing him. I think the other aspect to consider is if he does leave the Nets, right? This completely backfires on Kevin Durant, who basically left a very good situation with Golden State Warriors, who just won a championship, to a team that without Kyrie, you're not even sniffing the Eastern Conference playoffs.
And if Kyrie walked, would Durant ass out? And would the Nets honor it? I mean, he just signed a long-term extension. He's there for a while under contract. It's an expensive roster around him with guys like Ben Simmons. Joe Harris didn't play at all last year. He makes a lot of money. Is that something where they would say, okay, and they would trade him to Miami or something like that for, Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson? I don't know. I'm just speculating there, but obviously this is a disaster for the Nets and they got to fix it.
Honestly, I'm so happy to see this blow up in their faces. I'll be honest. Like, I think there was a certain smugness to all these Brooklyn Nets fans that were coming out of nowhere and basically crowning themselves. And here we are, both watching the playoffs from the couch.
With both New York teams combined for 0 playoff wins. And that's probably how it's going to go for the next couple of years, unless Kyrie Irving goes back to Brooklyn. So let's move on. Obviously, a pivotal NBA draft this Thursday. We still don't really know who's going to go number 1. We've heard Jabari Smith. We've heard Chet Holmgren. Listening to a couple of different podcasts involving Orlando Magic fans, they seem to want Chet. They really believe he's more the Orlando Magic fit, which is that lanky, twitchy athlete who will figure out the rest later. And when you have the number 1 pick, you want to go for upside. I get that. And he's the most upside guy in this draft, so I get it. I'm just so afraid of the body and that he's just not going to be able to hold up physically, to be an NBA superstar. And that's really what you're looking for with the number 1 pick. So I would go with Paolo Banchero, or I would go with Jabari Smith, or probably, if I could, I would trade down.
I mean, I'm not so worried about the injury aspect. He hasn't shown to be someone who's injury prone, and I get the body concerns, but it's really these intangibles that he supposedly brings to the table, like his fierceness, his defensive, instincts are things that all the teams.
They're very good, but can you see him guarding a Joel Embiid or a Nikola Jokic in the playoffs? I can't.
Well, I think the idea is this guy could probably guard 1 through 4. I mean, not 1. Well, yeah, I think he could probably potentially be able to do 1 through 5. And I think if we've learned anything about these playoffs is that you need switchy people.
Yeah. I mean, he's what?
And how many Embiids and Jokic's are you facing in the NBA finals?
No, that's fair. I mean, I think he can hold his own against Robert Williams or Kevon Looney, which is what we saw in the finals this year. But, this is a guy who I don't know if he can hold up as a NBA 5. And as you correctly said, maybe he doesn't have to. Maybe, if you're Orlando, you have Wendell Carter, Mo Bamba's restricted free agent contract is still there. Maybe they bring him back. So, if he's your 4, if you can get him to learn how to defend on the perimeter to a degree, I think that's fine. It's just, you have the number 1 pick. You got to get this right. And if he's healthy, I think he's the right pick. I just don't know if he will be.
But like those two other guys they're they're very talented and they're obviously the top three of that bunch. But like I think to a certain degree, like, Jabari Smith is not going to be, necessarily a big ceiling raiser either. And Paolo, like, very gifted go-to scorer, but is he the guy who's gonna bring Orlando to that next level? I think Chet presents he's a unique specimen in that way, that like you don't know what you're getting, but you also don't know how far you can go with him. And I think that's the most tantalizing aspect about him.
The one thing I would give Chet credit for is the confidence. I love the confidence. He is, they asked him, at one of these workouts the other day, who's the best player in the NBA? And he said, me in 2 months. And I just love that. So I'm rooting for him. And I'm not sure if they're going to take him. The betting favorite right now is Jabari Smith. And I don't know how Vegas seems to know those things, but they always seem to know. So
yeah, but Vegas gets it wrong too. And the one thing I'll add about Chet, and I do love the confidence thing that you mentioned, but I find it so annoying that a lot of these young prospects are always so like super confident. I'm like, I get it.
I love that. I love it.
Get it, but
yeah, I'd rather them be confident for sure. Let's talk about our Knicks. The big talk right now is we're not really sure who we like, who's going to be there at 11. You and I, when we had our draft talk 3 weeks ago, we both kind of said, okay, we'll find a guy we fall in love with at 11. I haven't. I have not found one. This is the first year I can say I have not found a guy in our range who I really love a lot. And I think the Knicks feel a similar way. Go ahead.
We may not need to.
We may not need to because, the rumors are that we're trying to trade up and, get to that fourth pick with Sacramento. And, Jaden Ivey is the guy. I think he's John Morant light. I think he's John Morant of his rookie year, crazy athletic, who can lead an offense. And if he can learn how to shoot at an average clip, I think he's an NBA star. And I think he's very capable of that. And, it's a very similar story, in terms of like getting much better the second year in college to John Morant. And we've been looking for a young point guard for 15 years, 20 years, 20, I guess probably since, dare I say it, for the second time in this podcast, Stephon Marbury. So, I mean, I really think this is the guy. And if you could find a way to trade up with a really not that smart Sacramento team, I would do it. I'm curious what they're looking for because we keep bringing up Julius Randle and everyone keeps saying, oh, well, they have Sabonis. Well, today there was a rumor from The Athletic that said basically they're looking at John Collins. Why would they be looking at John Collins, but then Julius Randle's not okay? They make similar money. I don't really get what they're trying to do. So that makes me feel like this is possible.
I don't know, man. I think that Randle and Sabonis are more similar than John Collins and Sabonis. I think at least with Collins, he could play.
I don't think Sabonis can play with either one of them, for the record. I think it'll be a disaster, but they're the Kings. So maybe they just let it happen.
I mean, they need talent just like us. So I get it. In any case, with the Knicks, I very much want them to go for some sort of wing. I think the NBA playoffs has shown us that wings, when in doubt, always go wing. Like we saw a plethora of very talented wings. We saw Tatum, we saw Wiggins, we saw Tatum. Obviously, those guys are all stars, but generally, those are the people that you want to aim for and build. If like in the current Knicks situation, we have to go for a home run. So we should go for a player that will be part of this rotation at some point. And I think that we could always use a wing. We don't want to get another front court person. I'd love to go for a guard, but the guards at that point aren't, except maybe Johnny Davis maybe. But
tell me about your guy Dyson Daniels. Why do you like him?
Well, I sort of like him because he could sort of like, he doesn't shoot great, but he has high IQ. He's been playing with grown-ups in the NBA G League league. And he's someone who has like an open court awareness. He's someone who could distribute the basketball. And I think those are all things that we need in a team that suffers from playmaking. You know, we might not get the point guard, but we might have someone who can lead an offense at some point.
Yeah, and
And like,
we've been looking for a guy who can lead the offense and
and,
shoot. Maybe you just get the guy who can lead an offense, baby steps.
and maybe, you know what, and at on some level, like, it wouldn't be the end of the world if we don't get a point guard, because I did see positive things from IQ, and maybe this could be the year the IQ gets the chance. I don't know, but those are those.
Derrick Rose is starting every game when he's healthy.
But basically, my point is that there's some flexibility with what we can do there. The one thing I wouldn't want to do is get a big man. That's it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And most of these mock drafts I've looked at have us taking off Mark Williams, a guy like that who could be a nice player, but at the end of the day, I think they're just too similar to Mitchell Robinson. And why would I waste a lottery pick on a slightly cheaper, less experienced Mitchell Robinson? I don't really understand why we would do that.
Fair.
If anything, go get our guy Ochai Agbaji with the 11th pick. Maybe it's a reach, but I mean, I know he could play at this level and be a nice role player. Whereas the centers, to me, Tom Thibodeau's not playing a rookie center. He's not. You're gonna see Taj Gibson more than ever at 50 years old. So like, we don't want that with the 11th pick. So I think obviously the home run is going to get Jaden Ivey, or moving up into that top 4, right?
Yeah.
The secondary thing would be going to get a wing or a point guard with that 11th pick. And then the only scenario where we would be upset is if they just draft a big man with that 11th pick. And that's kind of where we sit with the New York Knicks 2022 draft.
Are there any names that you like besides Ivy?
I'd be interested in Johnny Davis. You mentioned him before. Can't really get away from watching the sport right now without seeing his Taco Bell commercial, but that's not the reason I like him. I just think he's, I've heard the Josh Hart comparison, and Josh Hart really played well when he got to Portland. He looked like more than a role player. He looked like a legit starting shooting guard in the NBA. And I think that's what Johnny Davis can be. He's a guy who could score. He's a guy who can kind of do a little bit of everything. And, those kind of guys, if they can defend, they can play for Tom Thibodeau. And I think he's similar to Quentin Grimes, a guy who can kind of break into this rotation as a rookie. And I think that's really something we're looking for. So I'd be happy if he was the pick, but at the same time, what I really want is I want a home run swing to move up.
Fair enough.
All right, let's get to the winners. Let's get to the NBA Finals. The Golden State Warriors beat the Boston Celtics in 6 games. And Chris, I thought the big difference was going to be the turnovers. It was way worse than I thought. Boston just could not hold on to the ball. How do they improve that to get back here next year?
Well, it's so tough because I think the Celtics made all the right moves in terms of personnel. Like the Derek White move, even though Derek White didn't play well in the finals, he played well throughout the playoffs. And so the production from him and Grant Williams like submerged into a point that it was like it was hurting the team for both guys. I think they need to look into getting another sort of scorer. Maybe Pritchard was fine, but it was clear that he was being exposed on the defensive end against the Warriors. Those are the things that I'd be looking at if I'm them. For someone like Tatum, he had an awful NBA Finals. I think this year is good for him in terms of growth. So I think as long as Jason and Jalen and those guys just stick together, they'll be back. They're young enough. But even Bill Simmons, who's a big Celtics fan, said you never know when you'll be back. So it could be a missed opportunity. We don't know. But they had the lead in the fourth quarter in that game that we saw together, game 4. And to be quite honest with you, that's the moment I felt the series was over.
It turned out it was over. The Warriors ended up winning 3 straight, but yeah, I think the biggest issue is they just need a real point guard.
Yeah.
Marcus Smart is a great defensive guard. He's a legit starting guard, but the problem is he's just not a point guard. He's not a guy who can pass it in spots and get easier shot opportunities for Jason and Jalen. You saw Jalen Brown, fantastic player, can handle the ball, can dribble.
Yeah.
And that's something he has to work on. But if you had a point guard who can get him the ball in spots, I think that would limit the turnovers a lot. And
Yeah.
you just saw it from Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum played like 500 more minutes than the second closest guy in the season. He looked gassed.
He did look gassed.
He looked gassed. And like maybe he, people are speculating he had a shoulder problem, but he was like, flexing in a lot. But at the end of the day, he just played too many minutes. And that's something where I don't know if they can lower his minutes in the playoffs. It's hard to basically tell a guy, hey, we're saving you for the NBA finals. He may not get there, right? They played a long bunch of 7-game series. So if they could get a point guard who can get Tatum the ball in his spots, maybe he won't have to work as hard on offense. And that could really help those minutes not be as extensive.
I don't know about the minutes thing, man. Like, he's a young player.
I mean, he looked
at what point?
A lot of minutes.
Well, like at what point do we say, oh, those are too many minutes? That's too little.
I'm not saying it's too many minutes. I'm saying if they could find a way to make those minutes easier for him, where he does not have to carry the offense, I think that can go a long way. I don't think you can tell him. I'm saying I don't think you can tell him we're limiting your minutes in the playoffs. I don't think you could do that.
Yeah.
But I'm not even looking for an all-star point guard. Even if they brought in like a Ricky Rubio type, a guy who could just like average 8 assists, not really carry them on offense in terms of scoring the ball, but a guy who could really just be another ball handler for them, I think that would help a lot. And, in the games he's scoring, he can finish the fourth quarter. In the games he's not, Marcus Smart does. So I think that would be the way to go. And, they don't have a ton of money to spend this offseason, but I think, a guy like him on the mid-level exception, if he's healthy coming off of, I believe it's the ACL, I think that would be the way I would go.
I like that for them. What about the Warriors? Do you see, like, they're in quite a conundrum because they have some guys, not like huge key guys, but they have guys like Otto Porter, Gary Payton the third, I believe, and some other dudes. So what should their priority be this offseason if you're the Golden State?
The priority for me is Jordan Poole. He's a restricted free agent. I would like to bring him back. And I think the answer is just going to be, you're going to have to just match whatever he gets. If that's 4 years, 60 million, is it 4 years, 80 million? Is it more than that? I think that would be the way I would go. I don't really see these other guys like Porter or Payton as guys I couldn't replace. Whereas I feel like Jordan Poole's shot making was pivotal. He had a couple of, what was it? He had a bank three and then he had like a half court three. Those changed the games.
Yeah.
And so having him as that, like, not third splash brother, but 2.5 splash brother kind of thing, I think he was pivotal. And if they've made it clear for years, money is no object. We'll pay the tax. We'll do whatever we have to do. They had a $200 million payroll coming up this year. They're going to pay $200 million in tax or something crazy like that. So if you're them, 20 million for Jordan Poole is really 40 or 50 million for Jordan Poole. So that's a lot of money. So if you keep him, I would be comfortable just letting these other guys go, like Porter and Payton and Looney, and just hope in the draft or these young guys can kind of eat up some of those minutes. Why can't a Kuminga come in and play 15 minutes a game, or a Moses Moody or a James Wiseman? So I would do those kind of things. And if they can't handle those minutes by the trade deadline, then you go trade a second round pick, or you go find your buyout guys.
Isn't that so fascinating? The Warriors already have a young nucleus.
Crazy.
In the background. Yeah. I mean, Steph Curry was simply exceptional. It's not that I'm a hater at all, but it's just so hard to fathom someone so amazingly talented in the NBA like he is. Like, he just always finds a way. He's such a great playmaker. Obviously, we know about his shooting, but like, the most underrated aspect about his whole finals run was that he was able to get to the basket at ease. And I just thought that the Warriors were not going to match up well with the Celtics. But what do I know?
I mean, at the end of the day, it just came down to the turnovers where,
Yeah.
you turn the ball over against the Warriors, they're shooting in space. I thought both teams really struggled for the most part with their half court offense. And I felt like whoever was going to run the ball more would win. And both teams really didn't do it as much as I thought they should have. But the Warriors ran in the second half, and you saw a lot of big third quarters for them. And their NBA champions, their fourth championship in 8 years. And you wish them congrats. And as you said, I think they're probably the favorites to go back there out of the West next year.
I also wonder if the Celtics what hurt them with all the turnovers and whatnot, because that was a problem their whole like postseason and season, but their inexperience. I mean, it was just so evident to me that the Warriors were able to like find a key ways to like do stops, and the Celtics didn't really have anybody like an Andre Iguodala or like the other guys who've obviously been there before, like to say like, okay, guys, calm down, get to the next possession. Like, I wonder what this team will do with another year of experience, is what I'm saying.
I mean, it'll be fun to see how it goes. How do they incorporate these young guys into these things? They've made it clear we're not trading them for another big piece. So the only other option is to let them play. And I'm excited to see them kind of incorporate them more. You saw Kuminga in this rotation for most of the season. They got to the big spots and they're like, all right, go sit down, 19-year-old. But he's a guy who I think is ready for more minutes. And how does Andrew Wiggins play coming into the next final year of his contract? People are already talking about him getting a giant max extension. I would slow your roll there. He's a guy who was a joke all-star, this year and had an incredible finals. And I said it to you, and maybe it was hyperbole, maybe it's not, but he outplayed Jason Tatum. He did. Does that mean he's going to outplay Jason Tatum for the next couple of years? I don't think so. But at the same time, I would not be going crazy about giving him the extension now. I would wait, see how this thing plays out, because they changed his career. And so if he gets to free agency in a year, I can't imagine he's not going to give them the chance to match that offer, whatever it is. So that's going to be something to see how it plays out. But let's get to our final thoughts right after this. All right, Chris, final thoughts time here. Obviously, big night, Thursday night heading over. But before we get to that, Kenny Atkinson, the head coach of the Charlotte Hornets, for a good couple hours, that's over now. Apparently, he never winded up signing the contract, and they were waiting for a few days, and then they find out via Twitter that he wasn't going to be the coach.
Yeah, I think that's weird. I think probably the reason that isn't being reported or whatever, we're obviously just speculating, but it might be because Kerr's time as a head coach for the Warriors is probably finite. There's probably a number of years that Kerr will be on the bench. So that's the only reason I would think. Because it seems odd to me that family is the reason why, because obviously you would discuss that with your family beforehand. So for that to be the reason seems a little bit off to me, but whatever.
I really want to know what happened here. I hope we find out. Some of these we never do, but he had multiple interviews. They settled on a contract, and then it was time to sign, and he just ghosted them. Like, what was that?
And then they found out through Twitter, which is unsavory in many ways.
And it's, it sucks because Mike D'Antoni's not taking this job now as the runner-up. They're going to have to start this entire search over, so it's a disaster for them. And I'm curious where their future lies, because they have a big decision coming up with Miles Bridges, who's an RFA, who's looking for a max. Shams reported today that basically they are going to have a hard time saying yes to a max deal for Miles Bridges. And if that's the case, they're going to lose him. They're going to. So, you're going to wind up with no head coach, and you're going to lose your second best player coming on a breakout year that you drafted. It's going to be a rough couple of weeks for Charlotte if that happens.
I can't wait to find out the reason, but we'll see.
Anything else you got, Chris, before we wrap up the show?
Nothing, man. I'm just looking forward to the NBA draft. It's probably the last one we're going to watch in person for a while.
Stop. We stop with this.
Because I know someone's leaving to Florida forever, but whatever.
Stop
On
it.
a serious note, I am looking forward to the NBA draft. And the summer league, which is like also coming up in a few weeks. So, there's that coming up.
Absolutely. And that is going to do it for us here on the All Hoops podcast. We'll be back very shortly to discuss what the Knicks did, what the Magic did, what all these other teams did in the NBA draft. Hopefully we'll get some trades as well, but that's going to do it for us. We'll be back very soon.
Bye, everyone.